Awesome. Thank you, Jesse, so much for programming this and for having us all talk to you about the state of Apple. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about Apple as it relates to security and privacy. Privacy and security have been big buzzwords this year, between security leaks, between privacy excursions, Google Photos, or Photo, excuse me, and what we might be able to do with that kind of data. So we're going to talk a little bit about, as Jesse said, we're from three very different industries. Arnold and I kind of spearhead the journalism side of things. Marc is a designer, and Wil is a designer developer extraordinaire. So being able to kind of come at it from different angles, I think would be really, really interesting. So obviously, if you guys don't know me, my name is Serenity Caldwell. I am the managing editor for iOS for a site called iMore, alongside Renee Ritchie and Peter Cohen. Arnold Kim is the founder and, did you say editorial director currently of Mac Rumors. Marc Edwards founded Django Software, and Wil founded Delicious Monster. And what are you doing currently, Wil?
I'm working on my first new product in 11 years.
That's really exciting. Yeah, spoilers, guys. So, Arnold, I wanted to talk, or sort of start with you.
Sure.
Because you, in part, make your money off of exposing Apple's secrets.
Yes. Pretty much.
To put it politely. No, I'm actually kind of curious, sort of what drove you to start Mac Rumors, and also, how the industry has kind of changed in that regard.
Yeah. So no, definitely. I think so. I started Mac Rumors in 2000, which is a lifetime ago in internet time, and that was in the bad days before iPod. iPod came out in 2001. Steve Jobs had come back by then, but there's still a hardcore fan of Apple users, which there still exists today, but that group has grown, and it's far more mainstream than it's ever been. But I started personally out of pure personal interest. I would follow the Apple-related sites at the time, and just sort of aggregate the information that I found interesting, and then other people I felt would find interesting as well, relating to like future Apple products or what Apple's doing. And Apple's always been a secretive company. This is not a new era in terms of like Apple's like strong desire to keep everything like from the public. But things have changed so much over the last 15 years. Where when we started, it was just a pure hobby site, and the people that were interested were pure Apple enthusiasts. And at the time, there weren't that many of us, and they were generally talked down to, saying, Apple's not going to make it. But then over the years, and then certainly iPhone was probably a huge mark where like the audience for Apple exploded, and then also Apple's dependence on outside industries also exploded too, with like manufacturing in China and like the volume of iPhones they have to generate every year that results in like affecting their ability to keep secrets.
Absolutely. So actually, something that I've noticed recently with Mac Rumors and kind of the other sites is that you have started to diversify a little bit. It's not just straight like, here's the latest and greatest that Apple's planning in the lab. You started doing how-tos. You started doing things like that. Is that in part because is the rumor mill dying? Is it less exciting than it used to be to try and track down Chinese leaks as opposed to?
I think there's a few factors that result in like sort of diversification. I think first of all, Apple has become a little more predictable, and so there's a certain schedule they go on with the iPhone, certain schedule they go on those sort of things. But the other side is that Apple's so mainstream that you're trying to appeal to a larger audience than the hardcore core Apple people. So that in part is sort of trying to like provide something a little for everyone.
Absolutely. Marc and Wil, do you guys follow, this sounds so self-referential, do you follow Apple tech journalist sites as a way to sort of track the industry? Do you have your own sources that you prefer to try and figure out what Apple's doing next so you can plan your products accordingly?
I'm sure we both read everything everyone out there reads, and including iMore and Mac Rumors. And I was telling Arnold, I definitely follow the Mac Rumors buyer's guide, because if you don't, like I have in the past, I've been burnt by buying things at the wrong time. And yeah, so absolutely follow everything. And you need to be able to make certain predictions based on things that may be coming in future WWDC events and future APIs, and try to work out when there's hardware releases what that actually means and what's coming, and so you can be ready for it.
Absolutely.
I actually don't anymore. I used to read like compulsively every day, all the different sites, and I had like 7 tabs that I'd open, and then I realized like that's like an hour of my day that I'm spending just reading this stuff and distracting myself. And I was like, nah, I have Twitter if I want to distract myself. I don't need extra distractions.
Yeah, you have the hour, it's just in much smaller, you're reading maybe 300 posts instead of 30.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Wil, do you find as a developer, obviously, it's really hard to develop for Apple's future products when Apple is so secretive about their future products. But there are ways to kind of, as we saw with Phil Schiller talking to John Gruber last night at the talk show, there are sort of little hints and bits placed in the APIs. Do you want Apple to be more open to its developers? Do you feel like they're giving you enough breadcrumbs?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one great thing that's happened, and it didn't always used to happen, it did some, but is at WWDC you kind of know now you're going to get a beta of the new operating system, and you're going to have like 4 or 5 months to get your stuff ready for it. And that wasn't always the case. You didn't always know, like WWDC, new operating system, new stuff. So it is good for developers in that way because we can time it now. Like I can think, I want to actually release my current thing I'm working on in December. And I'm like, this is great because when I release this, I'm pretty sure 10.11 is going to come out. I don't have any inside info, but I'm pretty sure based on the last 4 years. So I can say, all right, well, I've got the beta. I can start using the new stuff and feel pretty confident in using it, which is really nice to have that sort of safety net. But the downside to the yearly schedule is by the time they release the beta to us, they've already frozen the APIs. They've been frozen for 5 months now. And so a lot of the APIs are just, not at all what we wanted, and there's absolutely nothing we can do. I mean, at WWDC they used to, let us stand up at the end of the sessions and give feedback, and then they moved all the feedback forums to, like Friday, and then I think now they're like, 2 weeks after the event closes, and they're on the moon, and like it's funny because you're just like, well, my feedback is, this entire API is garbage, and I don't actually want to use it, and nobody in this room does, and they're like, thanks, nothing we can do, we locked it down. And you're like, all right, well, why do we, there's not really, it's a one-way thing.
Yeah, do you find, does Apple ever reach out to you or to developers that you found when, say, you're working on specific types of apps? Does Apple ever go out and say, hey, we want your feedback on this, or hey, we're working on this API, we might want to...
It's incredibly rare. I think I'm not under NDA for...
Yeah.
The last time it happened to me was, I think, 3 years ago. And Apple was like, we're thinking about doing this thing, and it's this really cool idea. And they pitched me and a bunch of other developers on this idea.
So this is SeamKit, right?
No. And it was funny because they described it to me, and I was like, they're like, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I think I wrote a blog post asking you guys to do exactly this. So, good.
Maybe that's why you're
good
in
job.
the
That was the developer ID stuff, allowing
Right.
developers to sign their own apps with a certificate that Apple could revoke, so that we could have some level of security, but not full App Store approval process.
Having to deal with the sandbox and
Yeah.
all of that.
And I was really happy about that. That was such a nice.
Absolutely. So talking about hardware for a second, Marc, you have designed for Mac, for iOS, for this guy.
Yep.
This guy that we really didn't know what the form factor was going to be, what the pixels were going to be. We got WatchKit, last November after a lot of speculation. How do you design for future products without necessarily knowing, like before Apple even announces anything? How do you go about? Well, do we have anything that might fit on this device? How are we going to build for this device? And then even after getting the WatchKit and the developer specifications, how do you go about saying, I'm going to try and prototype and test this without ever having a physical device in my hands?
Right, sure. I guess there's two aspects of that. There's sort of the conceptual, and then there's the technical. The conceptual, I think you can come up with some ideas, but you can't really know until the thing's been announced, and then you can see how many physical buttons, if you have access to them, if you've got access to sensors, all that kind of stuff. So that'll pretty much shut down half the ideas you probably had, which is fine. You know, they've got to do what they've got to do. And then the technical side, so I guess we designed something for the day one launch of the, we didn't make it for the iPhone because in Australia we couldn't get our account registered in time. That just took a while. But we were certainly there for day one for iPad, and no one had a device. And I did work on something that was day one for the watch, and I didn't have a watch. You just have to make do with what you've got, and we've built some tools for doing device preview, so you can design it and actually see it live on a device. But obviously you can't do that until you have the device. But if you've got like an iPad and you think there's going to be a bigger phone, you could certainly, obviously you can use the screen, and Apple screens are really well calibrated, so they're all pretty consistent. Certainly close enough that it really doesn't matter for the first cut of something. So yeah, it's not that hard, and you can't. I mean, Apple gives us tools to see things in the simulator, and it's not the same, but it's usually close enough because no one's used the new device anyway. So on day one, if you've got something there, you can always go back and tweak it.
Absolutely. Have you ever run into problems after releasing software where it's, and so this is directed to both of you, where it's like your customers come to you like, I can't do this. This doesn't make sense. This doesn't work. And you have to go back to the drawing board.
We're usually pretty conservative when it comes to the user interface. Makes it a little bit less exciting, but it can mean that you don't end up having many issues on certainly day one. And if you want to do some crazy stuff, then yeah, you're probably better off waiting until you've got the hardware.
I think when the original Air was released, we actually had some customers come to us for like whatever it was at the time, Flash Library 2, and like, I actually can't click the OK button on this panel because it's off the bottom of my screen. Because we didn't expect them to ever release a device with, whatever, 400 by 12 pixels or whatever it was. I mean, it was something so low.
All combined like that. So switching to stuff we saw at DubDub this year at the keynote. Top priority question. What was the biggest thing announced that you did not think was going to happen? Yeah. What was not on your prediction sheet? Or your Chinese rumor mill.
I was pleasantly surprised at multitasking on iPad because, I mean, there's always been talk about it, but just given Apple, they're usually a little more, it seems like more of a power feature in some ways. So I feel like, for me, it wasn't a surprise in that, like, we'd obviously heard talk about it, but that they actually shipped it was nice.
Yeah. No, for the iPad, it's actually that's interesting to me. It was on one of my lists as well, where we've heard this rumor sort of passed around the last couple months about iPad multitasking, and I didn't think that it was going to come out beyond labs because I didn't think they were going to be able to make it a way that looked nice,
right?
that looked in a way that casual users could implement it and work with it. And I kind of feel like, having played around with the beta a little bit, it looks much nicer than I was expecting it to. I don't know if either of you have had a chance to see it. But there's also a question of like, well, is this like the multitasking gestures where Apple's just never gonna, where like the majority of people are never going to really turn them on or access them or play with them, and they really are just power features,
Right. We'll see. I think, yeah, some of the features Apple tends to ignore after multi-touch moving. I don't even use it because I just forget that it exists. But I don't know in terms of like design and app and design side. If you guys have any thoughts about that?
Yeah.
I mean, for as far as I can tell, for software, there's very little to do if you're doing your software right. So I was like, cool as a user, but I'm not. He said if you use the whatever it's called, layout guides and all that other stuff.
Auto layout, yeah.
You're going to be good. And so
yeah.
It looks neat. Do you think it's a response to all those ads that, I don't remember which device it was. Do you think multitasking on the iPad results? I don't know if it was the Surface or that HP one, or they're all sort of interchangeable.
Samsung.
But they made a big deal, Samsung.
Oh, no, it was
the one where
Surface.
they made a
Surface.
big deal about, and we could do two things at once all the time. And I was like, well, and I feel like maybe this is just their response saying, all right, we got two things too. There, shut up.
So I think Steve Troughton-Smith has been pulling apart iOS betas and OS 10 betas and everything forever. And I think he found some support for that like decades ago or something. It was
while,
just, it was like 3 years or something, or it was a long time ago. So it's possible, but it's also possible been experimenting and left some of it in there. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a lot of
Yeah,
stuff
they
in
may
the
have
labs.
just been refining the gestures and like, all right, we're not going to ship it if it's just ugly or hard to get at.
Right.
Unlike the watch, which they were happy to do that. They were like, yeah, sure, ship it ugly.
This is something. Do you think Watch 2.0 is going to solve some of that?
I mean, nothing I saw indicates that the watch is going to get the user experience improved. There was lots of, like, we're going to add stuff, and I'm like, but what you need to do with the watch is take away. I don't know how to use this damn thing, and I'm a programmer. I'm like, swipe up to get the little glances, and then, all right, well, I want to interact with the glance. Oh, click on it. Oh, now it launches the app. What, that wasn't the app? Why wasn't that the app? What the hell's going on? And then swipe down to see things, and swipe left to do another thing, and press this button to do another thing, and press this button to do another thing. I don't know what the
As a designer, Mark, do you think the watch is too overcomplicated?
Yeah, it's pretty full on. I mean, they've put a lot in a 1.0.
They did.
And I guess maybe some people would give them a bit of flack for not putting enough in a 1.0, like the original iPhone, which was beautiful and amazing.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know.
It
It's hard
sold
to find the
okay.
balance.
I mean,
it did
it
okay.
did fine.
Yeah, it'll be around for a while, I'd say. Yeah. So the question was.
Oh yes,
which,
going back. What was the feature that got you most excited on stage that you
and
didn't
most,
think was
most
yeah.
surprising.
Yeah, most
so
surprising.
Two things. The keyboard is fixed. You can see lowercase letters
Shift,
now.
yeah.
And shift works. That's,
What?
Yeah. So the shift key is no different. They didn't necessarily change the shift key, but the letters represent the state. It's really cool.
Shifts from upward, yeah. It's not
good
my
idea.
It's a good idea. It's a good
perfect
idea.
Good
solution.
idea.
Yeah.
The other thing was
like
metal.
that.
Metal on OS
Yeah.
10. That's, I don't know how many people in the audience know or even care about Vulkan, the future of OpenGL. Metal on OS 10 was something I didn't expect.
Why didn't you expect it?
Because I felt the need for metal was more likely to be specific for mobile. And because I also felt like, so when metal was announced for iOS, Vulkan hadn't been announced yet. And then in the meantime, and I think Apple's part of the consortium for the future of OpenGL, Kronos Labs or whatever they're called. And I thought they'd be privy to a lot of information that we wouldn't be privy to, probably. And therefore they would know what the future of OpenGL is, and they rely on OpenGL for OS 10. Obviously they like having a little bit of control over everything all the time.
Apple like in control?
No. So I didn't expect metal on OS 10, also because that means they have to write like device drivers for all the different hardware, and it's not a fun problem to solve. And it's cool they've done it, and there's obviously benefits for El Capitan, but I didn't. It was a shock.
Definitely.
Like with Vulkan in particular, I think this reminds me of the old days. God, the old days. Where
Lean
like,
back in your chair, put on your glasses.
well, kids, back in my day. So like every year, people would be like, "Why don't you program for Windows?" I'm like, "Well, because it, sucks." And they're
Straight
like,
talk.
and they're like, "Oh, but the new thing coming out from Microsoft is supposed to be really good. They have this new framework coming out. Have you seen it?" And I'm like, "No, always." And they're like, "Well, you should look at it." I'm like, "I don't think I have to because it has sucked for the last 20 years." And every time someone has said that to me over the last 10 years, "Oh, you should check out the new thing," I just wait a year, and then everyone says it sucks. So I just don't believe suddenly Microsoft has just, boop, come up with the ability to make an amazing framework when everything else they've done sucks. And I think that's true of OpenGL. It is such a giant piece of, and it's like, it's only gotten worse. They're like, let's put 2.0 on top of 1.0 and then have it incompatible in weird ways. Oh, let's do ES, it's kind of incompatible, not really, sort of, we don't know. Let's do 3.0, oh, throw that away, add this, make it not work, blah, 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 blah. And then they're like, well, no, Vulkan's gonna be great. And I'm like, no, you don't, I don't believe you anymore. Like, why would you believe that?
Right.
It's like, oh, this time for sure. What? Oh, you fell for it again. If I were Apple, I would never invest in Vulkan. I'm like,
Right, I guess if you had the resources and the cash, you might be like, yeah, we'll just make our own thing. It'll
Yeah.
do what we want, and if it doesn't work, we fix it.
and I mean, it got so much faster. I'm hearing 2.5 times faster
Right.
on the desktop, and I'm like, yeah, sign me.
But is that 2.5 times faster in comparison to Yosemite or Mavericks?
Yosemite.
I know. That's what I'm saying. Like,
You think GL was slower in Yosemite? I'm talking about GL, not the interface. I'm talking about if I'm doing 3D
right,
graphics.
but I think there's certain aspects of Yosemite that may have been slower than Mavericks. and possibly the slide was like, hey, in comparison to Yosemite, but it's not in comparison to. I'm not saying it's not faster.
Right.
It's just more that.
No,
you've gotta
I'm
be
not- I'm
careful
We're getting
what-
to math.
But-
It's
Yeah,
too
yeah, sorry.
hard.
Math is hard.
No, I actually think the metal is interesting. We had Brianna Wu, who runs Giant Space Cat, write an op-ed for iMore on this, where she was like, yeah, when I first saw it, I was kind of rolling my eyes and be like, metal for OS 10, why do we need this? And then once I dug into it a little bit, I actually got really excited, because it's like, oh, all of the major game developers are supporting this, and Adobe's supporting this, and wait, you know, if Autodesk and Maya and all of these tools actually run maybe as fast as they do when I'm using my Mac Pro, except now I only have to do a MacBook Pro. You mean I can develop faster, I can build games faster, and she started to get like really, really psyched about it. So it's interesting. That metal was not on my list of like, oh, that's such a cool feature. And then the more I hear from developers, especially people working in graphic intensive fields, on not only how that's going to help them develop, but also potential stuff that they can do with their games. It's pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I thought metal on the desktop was a slam dunk, but I'm really close to that with my new project with 3D and stuff. The thing that surprised me most was a really obscure thing, which is the Model I/O framework, which they glossed over. But they had some team do lighting and stuff for 3D objects, and I was very surprised to see them sort of go that in depth, because SceneKit on iOS was a big argument. Like it was, a year and a half ago, the guys in charge of graphics were like, we don't really want to do this, we've already got, there's Unity engine and all these other engines if you want to do games on iOS. And there's SceneKit if you want to do 2D graphics, so why would you want to do there's SpriteKit, why would you want to do SceneKit in addition? And then to go from that to, oh, we're actually going to, create all these ancillary frameworks was a big surprise.
Yeah, it seems like they're really focusing on more graphics work and more games work. To sort of close out, because we don't have that much time, I want to know from each of you what you still think needs work in sort of the Apple ecosystem. What are you not happy with right now? I feel like there was a lot of awesome things that got announced at DubDub, and a lot of things to be very, very excited about. But I'm still curious to see like where Apple still needs work and still needs improvement, because that's where they can grow, right? That's where potentially the future is in solving these problems. Wow.
Oh, so that's a really big question, I would say. There's like a list of things I think people always like complain about Apple about, obviously from a WWC standpoint, developer relations, certainly with App Store involvement, app approval process, transparency. And it seems like Apple's doing better on that for the most part. It sounds like they're reaching out more, they're participating more in the conversation. But I think that still is like a big factor. I think from the news side, they're doing more interesting things as well. So sounds like they're reaching out a little more.
It's not the great wall of siloed.
Yeah. So I think they're making steady improvements. There's not, unlike some WWDCs, I don't think there was not like, oh, well, there's this one thing that like I feel like Apple's just still completely next gen. I feel like they're making slow progress. But I think ultimately they're still very secretive, so there's only so much they can do without going against that nature, which is inherent to them for decades. So.
Yeah, for me, I'm just going to mirror the communication aspect of it. I would love more transparency and just to have access to talk to more people, but I don't think that's going to happen. I like the products. There's obviously small nitpicks, but a lot of that was solved with iOS 9 and 10.11. So. There's, plenty of good stuff coming. It's just communication.
For me, the big thing is they need to involve developers earlier when they're developing APIs, especially because, and most of this stuff is from the bad old days of 4 years ago. But they had come out with a bunch of APIs like the file presenter stuff in 10.7. Where it was just out of the blue, no one had asked for it, no one wanted it, it was incredibly buggy, the APIs were incredibly ugly, no one was able to get them to even work. And we're like, why did you just voice this on us? Like what? And then we gave feedback, they're like, well, nothing we can do, it's too late. And you're like, what? You could have involved us sooner, that's something you could do. And it's funny because like Swift, the language, was the exact opposite of this. they got us involved extremely early. And a lot of people are complaining. They're like, man, it's buggy and it's slow. It's like, yeah, because they finally involved us at a stage where we can actually meaningfully participate. And I'd file bugs, and a week and a half later, they'd be like, we fixed all 3 of these bugs. We haven't released Swift for you. And I'm like, and people are complaining. And I'm like, why are you complaining? If you don't like the bugs, don't use it. But, you know, we have a chance to shape our own future. And yes, this will be the language of the next 20 or 30 years. I think 20 is conservative. I've been programming Objective-C for 26 years straight with no other languages. And it's like, that's an eon in computer terms, right? Like, I think Swift will last that long. So it's like Swift is this perfect model. And it's strange to me that we're not doing that for the frameworks. Like, there's this leftover feeling of like, oh, if we announce in January that we're coming up with a new NS collection view, somehow Microsoft will copy us. Microsoft's not going to copy you. Like, come on, A, they don't have enough time in 5 months. B, they're so far in the weeds. What are we worried about? Like, what are they going to do? There's some guy there like, oh, I'm going to program NS collection view, and this will save Microsoft single-handedly. Dude, no, you're just, come on. It's not, I can bring back that Kin phone or whatever it's called. What was that one called?
Yeah, it was Kin.
Kin?
Yeah,
Was it Kin?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I talk about
Yeah.
Adobe now because they're a sponsor,
Absolutely.
and I'm going to say some nice things. So yeah, don't get. So Adobe, obviously they had a sneak peek here yesterday. Photoshop, I wasn't here, but I think there was new Photoshop stuff shown. That's obviously before release. That's cool, awesome. That's getting feedback. Maybe I don't know if it's too late to change things, but it's prior to release. And Adobe also have a, for Photoshop anyway, it's a feedback.photoshop.com website. That's like Radar, but the bug reporter, but it's open, it's on the web, anyone can read it, it's public. I've had a lot of luck.
Do they ask you for your system info for every bug you file?
No, they don't, and they don't mark anything as duplicate. So it's
amazing.
Yeah, it's awesome, and good and bad. There's usually get a quick response from. I've had responses from people who have been on the Photoshop team for like engineers for decades. So there's really good stuff there, and there's sometimes heated discussion as you'd expect when you actually have it out like that. But it's that's been awesome. That's all I want from Apple for public stuff. It doesn't have to be for the brand new thing where there's a beta or whatever, but just some way that we can see responses from other people and a way to just help everyone collectively rather than keeping it all siloed in a way that we don't have any access to.
Absolutely. Well,
Any kind of help.
yeah, you heard it first here, Apple. Poach Adobe's feedback team. Yeah, thank you guys so much for participating in this. This was fun and really illuminating, actually. Thanks, Arnold. I appreciate it. Where can folks find you?
Well, I'm personally on Twitter at Arnold Kim, and that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Awesome. Mark?
Marc Edwards on Twitter, it's Marc with a C, and bajango.com for all of our stuff.
And Wil?
Wil Shipley on Twitter, one word, no underscore, one L.
Awesome. And you can find me at Settern, SETTERN. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate you listening to us talk about Apple and where it's going.
Thanks.
Thank you.